What if everything you were waiting for, the peace, the freedom, the clarity, wasn't hiding in certainty at all, but in uncertainty itself? We spend so much of our lives trying to predict, control, and secure the path ahead, believing that once things are certain, then we'll finally be safe. But isn't it strange that no matter how much we try to hold the world still, it keeps moving, shifting, and reshaping in ways we never planned? Life, by its very nature, resists being pinned down, and yet this very resistance is where its beauty lies. Uncertainty isn't an enemy to defeat. It is the silent space where all possibilities are born. The people we meet, the moments that change us, the opportunities that awaken us, they all arrive from places we could not have predicted. To embrace uncertainty is not to give up on life, but to trust in its mysterious intelligence. Uncertainty is not to give up on life, but to trust in its mysterious intelligence. Ask yourself, what if the unknown is not a threat but a gift? What if the greatest ease you will ever find comes not from controlling the storm, but from standing in its center, unafraid? We live in a world that has quietly taught us to worship certainty, as if it were the ultimate proof of intelligence, safety, and success. From the earliest years of our lives, we are told to plan, to prepare, to have answers ready before the questions are even asked. Parents, teachers, and institutions repeat this same mantra. Know what you want, know where you're going, and know how to get there. At first glance, it sounds wise, even empowering, but beneath the surface, it plants a seed of quiet anxiety. Because the moment you are convinced that certainty is the foundation of a good life, every trace of unpredictability becomes an enemy, something to be eliminated or feared. This is the first misconception we absorb, that a worthy life is one that can be mapped in advance, a life immune to disruption. But what no one tells us is that the harder we chase this idea, the more fragile we become. The world does not bend itself to our desire for guarantees, and when reality inevitably shifts, it is not the uncertainty that breaks us, but the rigid belief that life must unfold in only one direction. The conflict deepens when we mistake control for strength. We cling to the illusion that if we can predict tomorrow, we will finally rest in peace today. Yet psychologists and philosophers alike have long warned that this pursuit is a trap. Control does not offer peace. It offers dependency on an outcome that is never fully in our hands. The Stoics spoke of this in their meditations, reminding us that freedom lies not in what we control, but in how we respond to what we cannot. And Machiavelli, often misunderstood, pointed to the harsh truth that fortune is unpredictable, like a river that floods without warning. Those who try to dam it with false certainty will eventually be crushed, while those who adapt and redirect its current find survival. Still, we resist. We cling to our maps and timelines as though they are shields against the storm, but control as strength is only a performance, one easily shattered the moment life dares to write a different script than the one we rehearsed. What complicates the picture further is how deeply society reinforces this misconception. The modern world celebrates those who appear to know exactly where they're going. We idolize certainty in leaders, in influencers, in public figures, mistaking confidence for wisdom. A wavering voice is seen as weakness, a hesitation as incompetence. As a result, we begin to perform certainty ourselves, crafting images of stability while quietly drowning in doubt. Social media accelerates this performance, rewarding those who package their lives into predictable stories of progress and achievement. But behind the curtain, countless people wrestle with the silent terror of not knowing what comes next. They believe they are failing simply because they cannot predict tomorrow. This cultural obsession with certainty becomes a mirror that reflects only half of reality, leaving the other half chaos, unpredictability, possibility, hidden in shadow, as if it were something to be ashamed of. And yet, deep down, everyone knows that uncertainty is the only constant. We know it in the sudden loss of someone we love. We know it in the unexpected opportunities that come without warning. We know it in the quiet moments when the future feels like fog, no matter how carefully we plan. But instead of making peace with this truth, we battle it. The conflict arises not because life is uncertain, but because we insist that it should not be. This insistence blinds us to what uncertainty actually brings. A canvas that has not yet been painted, a horizon we cannot yet imagine. Instead, we experience it only as a void, a place where our control has no power. Fear takes root here, and fear convinces us that the unknown is dangerous. when in reality the unknown is where everything new is born. The irony is cruel. In running from uncertainty, we also run from possibility. Think of how often we demand promises from life. We want the relationship to last forever, the job to be secure, the plan to unfold without interruption. And when life does not comply, we call it betrayal. But was it betrayal? Or was it the nature of life all along? The misconception lies in the expectation that permanence equals safety. But permanence does not exist in the way we imagine. Seasons change, people evolve, circumstances shift. By tying our sense of worth and stability to things that cannot remain still, we set ourselves up for disappointment. This is why so many break under pressure, not because they faced something unbearable, but because they built their peace on a fragile foundation. To demand permanence in an impermanent world is to live in constant conflict, a tug-of-war between how we want life to be and how it actually is. The truth is, we are not afraid of uncertainty itself. We are afraid of how uncertainty exposes our vulnerability. It reminds us that we do not know everything, that we cannot control everything, that we are smaller than we pretend to be. And because vulnerability is uncomfortable, we disguise it with control, with plans, with rigid expectations. But vulnerability is not weakness. It is the birthplace of growth. Every transformation we long for requires us to step into the unknown first. To grow in love, we must risk heartbreak. To grow in courage, we must face fear. To grow in wisdom, we must walk through confusion. Yet the misconception of certainty blinds us to this, convincing us that if we were strong enough, we would eliminate vulnerability altogether. In reality, strength is not the absence of vulnerability. It is the willingness to live inside it without losing ourselves. So the conflict is not between us and the uncertain world, it is within ourselves. It is the war between the part of us that craves control and the part of us that longs for freedom. One part whispers that safety lies in the known, in the predictable, in the mapped-out road. The other part quietly remembers that the best things we've ever experienced were born from unpredictability. Every love story, every breakthrough, every turning point was once wrapped in uncertain. The misconception convinces us that peace comes from eliminating the unknown, but the deeper truth is that peace comes only when we stop resisting it. Until we face this inner conflict, we will remain restless travelers, demanding maps for a terrain that has never been charted, forgetting that the beauty of life is not in its certainty, but in its wild, unrepeatable unfolding. Think about the first time in your life when something you never planned for completely reshaped your path. Maybe it was the person you met by chance, someone who walked into your life at the exact moment you needed them, without an appointment, without an introduction arranged by your schedule. Or maybe it was the opportunity you almost ignored, the one that seemed too uncertain, but later became the foundation for everything you built. These are the moments that prove uncertainty is not always the villain we imagine it to be. And yet, when they happen, our first instinct is often resistance. We say, "This wasn't supposed to happen now," or "I'm not ready for this." But readiness is not something life waits for, it is something we discover in the middle of the unknown. The most profound experiences are often not born from preparation, but from surrendering to the unexpected. When you look back, you realize that life's most meaningful turning points were not scripted, and if they had been, they would not have carried the same power. They came uninvited, and that is exactly why they were real. Consider how much energy we spend trying to predict the future, as though certainty could shield us from disappointment. We replay possible scenarios, analyze every detail, and try to force outcomes into neat boxes, but in doing so we also drain ourselves of the ability to experience life as it comes. The truth is, uncertainty only hurts when we resist it. When we try to rewrite tomorrow in advance, we become prisoners of imagined futures, worrying about paths we may never take. This is why so many of us lie awake at night, not because the present is unbearable, but because the uncertainty of what might happen steals our peace. Yet, if you look closely, every single time you survived a season of uncertainty, you emerged with new strength, a deeper sense of resilience, and a greater understanding of yourself. That growth wasn't a product of certainty, it was a product of walking through the fog, trusting each step, even when you couldn't see where the road ended. It was the process of walking through the fog, trusting each step, even when you couldn't see where the road ended. Think about heartbreak, about losing someone you thought you could never live without. In the middle of that uncertainty, it feels like a collapse, as if your entire future has vanished in an instant. But then, slowly, almost silently, you find yourself breathing again. You discover that life continues, not in the way you imagined, but in a new rhythm that reveals strength you didn't know you had. Or imagine the uncertainty of failing, losing a job, missing an opportunity, making a mistake so heavy you thought it would define you forever. At first, it feels like the end, but with time you realize it was also the beginning of something else, a lesson, a new direction, a version of yourself that only emerged because the old certainty was destroyed. These moments, painful as they are, remind us that uncertainty is not just chaos. It is the space where reinvention is born. Without the breaking, we would never discover how much we are capable of carrying. And then there are the beautiful uncertainties, the ones we almost overlook. Falling in love, for example, is the purest form of stepping into the unknown. No matter how deeply you feel, there are no guarantees. You can only choose to open your heart, knowing that it might be broken. Yet we still choose love again and again, because deep down we understand that certainty would kill its magic. The same is true of creativity, of art, of chasing a dream. If we knew exactly how it would end, if we could predict every step, the journey would lose its power. It is the uncertainty that makes the pursuit worthwhile, that sharpens our senses and teaches us presence. The greatest joys of life are inseparable from risk, and risk is inseparable from uncertainty. And so, to deny uncertainty is to deny the very experiences that make us human, that make us alive. But because we fear uncertainty, we often choose comfort instead. We stay in jobs that numb us, in relationships that diminish us, in routines that quietly suffocate our spirit. We tell ourselves that at least this way we know what to expect. But what we don't see is the hidden cost. The price of avoiding uncertainty is often the loss of our aliveness. Familiar suffering feels safer than the possibility of unknown joy, so we cling to it. This is why so many people reach a point in life where they feel hollow, not because they lacked certainty, but because they avoided the uncertainty that could have awakened them. And when we look at others who dared to step into the unknown, we call them lucky, when in truth, they simply chose courage over comfort. There is also the subtle pressure of society whispering that certainty equals success. We compare ourselves to people who appear to have their entire lives figured out, and we assume they are stronger, wiser, more capable. But the truth is, no one is free from uncertainty. The difference lies in how we respond to it. Some people hide behind masks of certainty, performing stability for the world while battling storms inside. Others, however, learn to walk openly with their uncertainty, admitting that they don't have all the answers, and in doing so, they discover a kind of freedom most never taste. This freedom comes not from knowing everything, but from no longer needing to. And once you touch that space, you begin to live differently. Not in fear of the unknown, but in curiosity of what it might reveal. When you reflect on your own life, you will find that your most defining moments were surrounded by uncertainty. They did not announce themselves with clarity. They arrived unpolished, unpredictable, and often disguised as endings rather than beginnings. And yet, when you look back, you see that those moments shaped you in ways certainty never could. They broke your illusions, expanded your vision, and deepened your heart. This is the paradox of the human experience. We fear uncertainty while simultaneously needing it for growth. Without it, we would live in repetition, repeating the same patterns, never discovering who we are beyond the roles we already know. The invitation, then, is not to erase uncertainty, but to step into it, to meet it with openness rather than resistance. Because it is there, in the fog and the unknown, that life reveals its most honest and transformative truths. There is a silence that comes when you finally stop demanding that life give you answers. It is not the silence of defeat, but of awakening. It feels like standing before an endless horizon, realizing you do not need to measure it to know its beauty. In that silence, you discover something rare, the ability to be still within uncertainty without letting it consume you. It is as if the noise of fear begins to dissolve, leaving space for something deeper to emerge. You start to see that you are not fragile in the face of the unknown. You are vast enough to hold it. This silence is not empty. It is full of presence, a reminder that strength does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it breathes quietly, reminding you that the essence of your being has always been larger than the questions you cannot yet answer. And in that moment, you realize that your worth was never tied to knowing, but to being. Your scars, once seen as evidence of weakness, begin to shift in meaning. They are no longer reminders of what broke you, but proof of what you survived. Each scar carries a story, and within each story lies a lesson that could not have been learned any other way. The pain you endured was not in vain. It carved depth into your soul, depth that allows you to feel more, to understand more, to live more fully. People often hide their scars, fearing they will be judged, but awakening shows you that your scars are not blemishes, they are symbols. They remind you that you have endured storms and still remained standing. That resilience is not the absence of struggle, but the decision to keep moving despite it. In this light, your scars become not your shame, but your crown, the visible marks of an inner strength that no one can take from you. Solitude too takes on a new meaning. Where once it may have felt like loneliness, in awakening it becomes a sanctuary. It is in solitude that you meet yourself most honestly, without the noise of the world telling you who to be. In the quiet of your own company, you begin to sense your true essence, one that does not need validation, permission, or certainty to exist. Solitude teaches you that you are never truly alone, because within you resides an unshakable presence, a light that does not flicker with circumstance. It is here that you discover your capacity to sit with discomfort without trying to escape it, to hold uncertainty without collapsing into it. And in that solitude you realize something profound. Your strength was never about being unbreakable, but about being able to break and still return to yourself. Solitude becomes not an exile, but a homecoming. Awakening also reveals that strength is not about control, it is about surrender. Not the surrender of giving up, but the surrender of trusting life's intelligence more than your own fear. You stop fighting the river and instead you learn how to flow with it. This does not mean passivity. It means participating in life without needing to dictate every detail. It means recognizing that while you cannot control every storm, you can control how you breathe in the middle of it. You start to see that true strength is fluid, adaptable, like water that finds its way through stone. Control once felt like security, but now surrender feels like freedom. You no longer have to exhaust yourself trying to predict every outcome, because you have learned to trust your ability to navigate whatever comes. This shift is the essence of awakening, realizing that the power you sought outside of yourself was within you all along. There is an imagery of light that often appears in awakening, not a blinding, overwhelming light, but a steady, gentle glow. It is the light you carry when the world around you feels dark, the light that guides you not by revealing the whole path, but by illuminating the next step. This light is not external. It comes from within, born from every moment you chose to rise when you could have fallen. It does not demand attention or recognition. It simply shines, quietly but undeniably. Others may notice it, sensing something different in you, but they cannot name it. That light is the result of embracing uncertainty instead of resisting it, of trusting that even in the absence of guarantees, you can still move forward. And once you see this light within yourself, you realize you were never lost, only learning how to see in the dark. When you awaken to your inner strength, you also awaken to a new kind of freedom, the freedom of not needing to prove anything. You realize that your value is not tied to outcomes, achievements, or the approval of others. It exists simply because you exist. This realization is radical in a world that constantly measures worth in external terms. It allows you to move through life differently, with a quiet confidence that does not waver when plans fall apart. Failures no longer feel like the end. They feel like teachers. Rejections no longer feel like judgments. They feel like redirections. You stop clinging so desperately to certainty because you have discovered something greater. The ability to remain whole even when everything around you is uncertain. This wholeness is your greatest wealth, and it cannot be taken away. And perhaps the deepest part of awakening is understanding that ease does not come from escaping storms, but from learning how to stand in their center. Life does not promise calm skies, but it does offer you the chance to grow roots strong enough to withstand the winds. You begin to see that every challenge, every uncertainty, every scar was not a punishment, but an invitation to discover who you really are beneath the surface. This is the essence of inner strength, not a hardened shell that resists the world, but an open heart that welcomes it, even when it is unpredictable. You realize that you are not here to control life, but to experience it, to walk with it, to grow through it. And in that realization, the weight of uncertainty begins to dissolve. Life becomes easier, not because it changes, but because you have. When you begin to see uncertainty differently, life takes on a gentler rhythm. The constant tension of needing guarantees loosens its grip, and you realize that control was never peace, it was only pressure disguised as security. The ease you have been searching for does not come from bending life into the shape of your expectations. It comes from stepping into life exactly as it is, unpolished and unpredictable. This realization is liberating because it allows you to breathe without waiting for everything to make sense. It frees you from the prison of what if and places you in the quiet power of what is. The real revolution is not about changing the storms outside of you, but about transforming the way you stand within them. This is where strength is born, not in knowing, not in predicting, but in allowing yourself to exist fully, even when the path is unclear. The moment you embrace uncertainty, you step into a kind of ease that is not dependent on outcomes, but on trust. It is easy to believe that transformation comes from external victories, achievements, recognition, validation. But if you look closely, those moments, while meaningful, are fleeting. They pass, and you are left searching for the next milestone to keep you steady. The deeper revolution, the one that truly shifts your life, happens quietly, within. It is when you realize you no longer need external approval to feel worthy. It is when you can sit with not knowing and still feel whole. It is when the fear of uncertainty stops dictating your choices, and instead, curiosity begins to guide you. Outward success may impress others, but inward transformation frees you, and that freedom is the only real foundation you can stand on, because it is not dependent on things that can be taken away. It belongs entirely to you. When you awaken to this truth, you also stop searching for validation in places that were never designed to give it. You see how much of life is built on performances, people pretending to be certain, pretending to be unshaken, pretending to have it all figured out. And in the past, you may have felt small in their presence, as if your uncertainty made you less. But now you see that their certainty is often just a mask, a fragile construction meant to hide their own fear. And suddenly, you no longer envy them. You no longer feel the need to compete in the game of appearances. Instead, you feel compassion, because you know the weight of living behind a mask, and more importantly, you feel freedom, because you have chosen to live without one. In embracing uncertainty, you embrace authenticity, and that authenticity becomes your quiet strength. This shift changes the way you walk through life. Failures that once crushed you now feel like teachers. Endings that once devastated you now look like invitations to begin again. Rejections that once wounded your worth now remind you that not everything is meant to be held, and that is not a loss but a redirection. You stop trying to cling to permanence because you understand that life was never meant to stay still. You start to trust the rhythm of change, even when it disrupts what you thought you wanted. And in doing so, you no longer carry the weight of resisting what is inevitable. Instead, you begin to flow with it, moving not with fear, but with presence. This is what it means to live lighter, not because the storms vanish, but because you no longer demand that they must. You accept them as part of the journey, and in that acceptance, you discover a kind of peace that certainty could never offer. The real beauty of embracing uncertainty is that it reconnects you with possibility. When you are no longer enslaved by the need to predict everything, you open yourself to outcomes you never would have imagined. You begin to see life not as a straight line, but as a vast horizon, full of doors that reveal themselves only when you stop clinging to the ones you already know. This openness allows joy to surprise you, allows love to find you, allows opportunities to emerge from places you never expected. And the irony is, this is what you were searching for all along. The richness, the aliveness, the sense of being part of something larger than yourself. It was never hiding in certainty. It was always waiting in the unknown. The unknown is not emptiness, it is possibility. And once you feel that truth, you never look at uncertainty the same way again. So the invitation now is simple, though not easy. Let go. Let go of the illusion that certainty is safety. Let go of the belief that not knowing is failure. Let go of the mask that pretends you have all the answers, and instead step into the unknown, not as a prisoner of fear, but as a creator of possibility. Trust that you are strong enough to walk without guarantees. Trust that the same strength that carried you through every storm so far will carry you through the next. Trust that life, in all its unpredictability, is not working against you, but with you. And perhaps most importantly, trust yourself. Because in the end, the greatest ease you will ever know does not come from controlling life. It comes from embracing it, fully, wildly, and without certainty. That is the silent, soulful revolution. And it begins the moment you choose to breathe and step forward, even when the path is hidden in fog.